Maybe you clicked out of curiosity, or maybe, without even knowing, you were looking for a quiet corner, where words arrive slowly and silence is part of the conversation. I stitched this story together with care, a mix of memories, hurt, and small discoveries, hoping that somewhere in it, you might see a piece of yourself. If you do, stay a while. Listen as long as you like. And if you feel like leaving a little sign you were here, a soft, "I'm here," in the comments, a like, or even sharing this with someone, it means more than you think. I grew up in Willow Creek, a quiet suburban town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, especially my family's. From as early as I can remember, I was the afterthought in my own home. My older sister, Madison, was the sun around which our entire household revolved, and I was just her shadow. One of my earliest memories is of a birthday party when I was 7. The living room was full of balloons and relatives sipping lemonade. Madison, who had just turned 12, tore open a box to reveal a shiny pink mountain bike with a matching helmet. Everyone clapped and took pictures. When it was my turn, Mom handed me a single wrapped gift. I peeled off the paper to find a spiral notebook with wide ruled lines and a pack of cheap pencils. I remember blinking, confused. "Don't look so disappointed," Mom said, her voice soft but firm. "You're the little sister. You need to learn to share in Madison's happiness. One day, you'll understand." That became the soundtrack of my childhood. "Let your sister have this. She's older, she needs it more. You'll get your turn, maybe." By the time I was a teenager, I'd learned to stop expecting anything. Madison went on choir trips to New York. I stayed home to feed the neighbor's cat for extra cash. She got designer dresses for homecoming. I wore thrift store finds I altered myself. But there was one thing in my life that was truly mine. My car. It wasn't much. An aging blue Honda Civic I bought after 3 years of babysitting, dog walking, and doing food delivery gigs on my bike. But to me, it was freedom. It was proof that I could survive outside the orbit of my family's favoritism. Every dent on that car had a story. The scratch on the passenger door? From delivering cupcakes during a snowstorm? The sticker on the bumper? From the first road trip I took with friends, 2 states over, when I finally felt like someone in charge of her own life. I never said it out loud, but that car wasn't just metal and tires. It was my only safe place. The one thing my parents couldn't twist into a reminder that I was second best. Looking back now, I realized the resentment didn't start at Madison's wedding. It had been building for years, quietly, like water behind a dam, waiting for the day I couldn't hold it in anymore. 2 weeks before Madison's wedding, I came home to find my parents waiting in the living room like they were about to deliver bad medical news. Dad sat stiffly in his recliner, arms crossed, while Mom perched on the edge of the couch, her lips pressed into a line. "Sit down," Dad said. "We need to talk." My stomach sank. This wasn't about chores or family dinners. This was the same tone they used when telling me our old dog had to be put down. Mom started gently, but her words were anything but. "Sweetheart, Madison's big day is coming up. You know how much this means to our family? The venue, the catering, the live band. Well, it's all expensive." I nodded cautiously, waiting for the real point. Then Dad leaned forward. "We've decided the best way you can contribute is by selling your car. The money would cover the floral arrangements and the upgraded photography package." I blinked. "My car? My car?" Mom didn't flinch. "Honey, you're not getting married anytime soon. You don't really need it. At least help the sister who's about to be a bride." I felt the words like a slap. That car wasn't just transportation. It was everything I had built for myself. The one symbol of my independence in a family that never saw me. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I'm not selling my car." The room went cold. Dad's face darkened. "Do you even understand what you're saying? This is family. You owe us for everything we've done for you." I wanted to scream. Owe them? For the hand-me-down clothes? For being treated like background furniture for 20 years? I've worked for that car. I pay for it. I maintain it. I'm not giving it up for centerpieces or Madison's third dress change, I said, louder than I'd intended. Mom's eyes turned icy. So you'd rather let your sister down on the most important day of her life? You're going to make the whole family look bad? By that night, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Aunt Linda, your parents are heartbroken. Why can't you sacrifice just this once? Cousin Jenna, honestly, it's just a car. Madison deserves this. Don't be so selfish. Grandma, via voice message. Families are about giving, not taking. I'm disappointed in you. I stared at the screen, feeling the heat of shame and fury mix in my chest. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was the family's villain, all because I wouldn't give up the only thing that was truly mine. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to see, was that this wasn't just about a car. This was about years of being the afterthought, the shadow, the disposable daughter. And something inside me was starting to shift. The wedding day arrived like a movie I wasn't invited to star in. The ballroom at the lakeside pavilion glowed with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and champagne flutes lined in perfect rows. A string quartet played near the entrance while guests in designer gowns and tailored suits swirled through the golden light. And me? I was escorted to a flimsy white plastic chair shoved up against the side door right next to the kitchen. I could hear the clatter of dishes and the sharp hiss of a chef yelling, "Hot pan!" more clearly than the vows I was supposedly there to witness. A distant cousin waved politely from a table draped in silk and candlelight. My table had nothing. Not even a program. It was like I was an afterthought they couldn't quite eject from the guest list. I kept my head down, scrolling on my phone to distract myself until I heard the wedding photographer call out, "All right, family of the bride, let's gather for pictures." For a moment, a fragile hope flickered. I could at least be in one photo. I slipped toward the cluster of relatives arranging themselves in front of the floral arch, but Mom stepped in front of me. "Oh, maybe you should sit this one out. It's just for the close family." I froze. My heart thudded. I'm your daughter. How much closer does it get? Before I could say anything, Madison, radiant in her lace gown, smiled politely at the camera, pretending I wasn't even there. I backed away, heat crawling up my neck. That's when Caroline, in her champagne bridesmaid dress, walked past me and leaned in just enough to whisper, "If you'd sold that car, you'd probably be standing up there right now." Her words hit harder than any scream could have. For a split second, I imagined smashing the champagne glass in my hand. But I didn't. I just swallowed the sting. The photographer snapped away, flash after flash, my absence permanently captured. I slipped out quietly, past the valet, into the cool night air. No one noticed me leave. No one ever did. As I unlocked my car, the one thing that was still mine, I made a silent promise to myself. This ends tonight. I may be the family's villain, but I won't be their victim. I drove through the city with no destination, just letting the streets guide me. Neon signs and streetlights smeared across my windshield like watercolor streaks. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized, the leather warm under my fingers. Every turn, every stoplight, I replayed the night in my head. The plastic chair, the ignored texts, Caroline's whisper like poison. If you'd sold that car, you'd be standing there. I felt my chest tighten. I gave them my entire childhood, I muttered to myself, voice shaking. All the quiet sacrifices, the hand-me-downs, the missed parties, the extra shifts just to buy my own freedom. And now they want to take the last thing that's mine? I pulled into an empty overlook above the city. The skyline blinked back at me. Tiny lights, each one a life I wasn't living. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than I felt, like the years of being the good little sister had stolen pieces of me I could never get back. The rage came first, hot and dizzying. But then, slowly, it hardened into something colder. Sharper. I realized something. I didn't want revenge to humiliate them. That would be too easy, too small. I wanted freedom. I wanted to reclaim the narrative they had written me out of. If they saw me as selfish, fine. If they cast me as the villain, So be it. But this time, I would be the author of my own story. Leaning back in my seat, I started thinking, really thinking, about the wedding, about the way my absence in those photos was a choice they had made for me, and about how I could make my next move one they would never see coming. It wasn't about a car anymore. It was about respect, about finally stepping out of the shadow they had built for me since I was a child. By the time dawn painted the horizon pink, I had a plan forming, not yet sharp, but solid enough to feel like armor. They thought I was the quiet one, the accommodating one. But they were about to learn what happens when the invisible daughter finally decides to be seen. For 2 years, I had been living a double life no one in my family bothered to notice. By day, I was the invisible daughter, the one who nodded quietly during family dinners and listened to my parents gush about Caroline's career. By day, I was the invisible daughter, the one who nodded quietly during family dinners and listened to my parents gush about Caroline's career, her engagement, her perfect life. But every evening after work, I switched gears. I delivered furniture for a local antique store, bought and sold vintage pieces online, and learned to spot value where others saw junk. It started small. An old mirror from a yard sale I flipped for $120. Then a 1950s lamp that went for $350 to a collector in Seattle. I saved every dollar, and instead of splurging, I reinvested it, buying storage unit contents at auction, like a scavenger for forgotten stories. One day, a listing came up. Unit 47B in the downtown storage complex. The owner had defaulted on payments for months. I skimmed the public record, and my breath caught. The name on the lease was my parents'. I thought it had to be a mistake. But when I attended the auction, the manager confirmed, "They've been behind for a while. If no one bids, it goes to disposal." I won the bid with money I had quietly saved for almost a year. It wasn't cheap, but it was mine. And just like that, every family heirloom they ever cared about now legally belonged to me. Grandfather's pocket watch, my grandmother's china, the boxes of old photos they only ever unpacked at Christmas. I signed the paperwork and started paying the storage fees under my own name. No trick. No scam. Everything was by the book. I drove home that night with a strange calm humming in my chest. They had always treated me as an afterthought, an accessory in the family portrait, a backup wallet for Caroline's needs. But now, I held the real family legacy in my hands, not out of spite. Not yet. But I knew that when the time came, this secret would change everything. I didn't jump straight into revenge. Instead, I decided to start with a whisper, a hint of the storm they had brought on themselves. Late one night, I drove to the storage unit, carefully opened the metal door, and snapped a picture of Grandpa Henry's oak cabinet, the one my parents swore would never leave the family. In the dim light, the photo looked almost ghostly. Then I sent it to my mother with a short message. "I've learned to protect what's mine, have you?" No threats, no explanations, just that. The next morning, chaos erupted in the family group chat. Mom. What is this? Dad. Did someone break into the house? Caroline. Why are you sending creepy pictures? Are you okay? Within an hour, my parents were calling the police, convinced that someone had broken in and stolen the heirloom cabinet. When the officers checked the house and the security cameras, they found no sign of a break-in. I knew exactly when the police must have told them the truth. The camera feed from the storage facility had my car entering legally, keycard and all. I wasn't a thief. I was the owner. That evening, my father called me, his voice sharp. Dad. You're playing with fire, young lady. I don't know what game you're running, but you're making a fool of this family. Not a single word of apology. Not a single acknowledgement of the years I had been treated like disposable furniture. They weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of losing their image. I hung up with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. This was just the first step. The next move would leave no room for denial. The silent warning had done its job. Now, it was time for the final collection. I unlocked the storage unit and stood in front of decades of my family's history. The oak cabinet, the silver dinner set they never let me touch, the carved Victorian chairs my mother only took out for real guests. I ran my fingers along the polished wood and whispered to myself, "You treated me like I didn't exist. Well, now I get to decide what exists." I started with the Victorian chair set. I took careful photos in soft lighting and listed them online with a caption that wasn't just about furniture. Some legacies deserve to live in homes where they are truly valued. A day later, a couple drove 3 hours to pick them up. The cash in my hand felt like freedom, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that for the first time, I was in control of something my parents had hoarded as if it were sacred, yet never shared. Next went the oak cabinet. I posted a close-up of the carved family crest, captioned, "History should be honored, not hidden. Passing this piece to someone who will." I could almost hear my mother scream from miles away. The calls began pouring in. Mom, sobbing, "Please, you can't sell that. It's your grandfather's." Dad, furious, "You do this and you're no longer my daughter." Then an email arrived from Dad. "If you keep this up, we will formally cut all ties. You are dead to this family." I read it twice. It stung for a second, but then I remembered the plastic chair by the kitchen door at Caroline's wedding. I remembered 7 birthdays of graph paper notebooks while my sister unwrapped jewelry and gadgets. And suddenly, their threats felt weightless. Piece by piece, I sold the heirlooms they had used as symbols of their superiority, turning them into my freedom fund. I didn't post rants. I didn't scream online. Just simple poetic captions with every sale. Leaving shadows behind. Some treasures find better homes than the ones they were born into. Freedom sometimes comes wrapped in bubble wrap. The satisfaction wasn't in the money, though it was good. It was in watching them finally taste powerlessness, one sold heirloom at a time. If they wanted to treat me like a ghost, then I would let the world see the ghost they created. I rented a small community art space in downtown Portland. Nothing fancy, just white walls, warm lights, and enough room to tell my story. I named the exhibit, "The Forgotten Daughter." Each heirloom I hadn't sold yet became a storytelling piece. I printed little cards to place beside each item, and I didn't hold back. Golden bracelet, never gifted to the daughter who was never enough. Silver serving set, only polished for holidays, where my chair was by the kitchen door. Carved oak cabinet, guarded like a treasure, but never for me. Today, it speaks. I even placed my first car key in a glass box with a note, "My only freedom. They tried to take this too." The opening night was small, just a few curious locals and some students from the art college nearby. But something happened I didn't expect. People stopped in front of each card and got quiet. A young woman whispered, "Oh my God, this was me." An older man shook his head. "Families can be cruel in ways they'll never admit." By the second day, someone posted a TikTok of the exhibit. Then a local newspaper reached out. "We'd like to feature your story, the daughter who turned pain into art." Within a week, the story went viral. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. I felt this in my soul. "Thank you for giving words to what I lived through. You're not forgotten anymore." Meanwhile, my parents and Caroline were imploding. Old family friends started asking awkward questions. "Is this about your family? Did you really treat her like that?" Caroline texted me in all caps, "Take this down. You're humiliating us." But I didn't respond. Because for the first time in my life, my voice was louder than their, and the world was finally listening. The exhibit was in its second week when he finally came. My father walked into the gallery on a quiet Thursday morning, his shoulders stiff, jaw tight. He looked older than I remembered. The walls around him were lined with the relics he had once called our family's lifeblood. Now, strangers were standing in front of them, reading my story. I stood near the entrance, watching him trace the polished wood of the old oak cabinet. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Have you humiliated this family enough?" I swallowed, meeting his eyes. "I didn't humiliate anyone, Dad. I just told the story you never let me tell." He turned sharply toward the golden bracelet in the glass case, the one I was never allowed to touch. His voice rose, carrying across the gallery. These are heirlooms. They were meant for family. You're destroying everything your grandparents built. Visitors froze, whispering behind their hands. I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear anymore, with clarity. I walked to the antique jewelry box, the one I had kept locked for the exhibit. From inside, I carefully pulled out a yellowed envelope tied with ribbon. You mean, like this? I opened it in front of him. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, his mother, dated 30 years ago. Her words cut through the air like a bell. To my youngest granddaughter, I hope one day you know I see you, even when others don't. Families forget the quiet ones. Don't let them erase you. The room went silent. Even my father's breath seemed to pause. I let the letter fall gently back into the box. You always said this was your legacy? I said softly. But it seems even Grandma knew I was invisible in my own family. His hands trembled, gripping the edge of the display. For the first time, I saw something crack. Not anger, not pride, but shame. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the letter, then at me, and finally walked out. The heavy gallery door closed behind him, leaving only the quiet hum of the lights and the murmurs of strangers who had witnessed everything. And in that moment, I felt free. Not because he forgave me, but because I no longer needed his permission to exist. The exhibit was in its second week when he finally came. My father walked into the gallery on a quiet Thursday morning, his shoulders stiff, jaw tight. He looked older than I remembered. The walls around him were lined with the relics he had once called our family's lifeblood. Now, strangers were standing in front of them, reading my story. I stood near the entrance, watching him trace the polished wood of the old oak cabinet. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Have you humiliated this family enough?" I swallowed, meeting his eyes. I didn't humiliate anyone, Dad. I just told the story you never let me tell. He turned sharply toward the golden bracelet in the glass case, the one I was never allowed to touch. His voice rose, carrying across the gallery. These are heirlooms. They were meant for family. You're destroying everything your grandparents built. Visitors froze, whispering behind their hands. I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear anymore, with clarity. I walked to the antique jewelry box, the one I had kept locked for the exhibit. From inside, I carefully pulled out a yellowed envelope tied with ribbon. You mean, like this? I opened it in front of him. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, his mother, dated 30 years ago. Her words cut through the air like a bell. To my youngest granddaughter, I hope one day you know I see you, even when others don't. Families forget the quiet ones. Don't let them erase you. The room went silent. Even my father's breath seemed to pause. I let the letter fall gently back into the box. You always said this was your legacy, I said softly. But it seems even Grandma knew I was invisible in my own family. His hands trembled, gripping the edge of the display. For the first time, I saw something crack. Not anger, not pride, but shame. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the letter, then at me, and finally walked out. The heavy gallery door closed behind him, leaving only the quiet hum of the lights and the murmurs of strangers who had witnessed everything. And in that moment, I felt free. Not because he forgave me, but because I no longer needed his permission to exist. The gallery exhibit ran for another month, and to my surprise, it became a quiet sensation in our small city. Local papers called it the Forgotten Daughter's story, and a few bigger blogs picked it up as a human interest piece. By the time it closed, I had earned enough royalties and sales to finally make a dream real. I rented a small corner space downtown and opened my own antique shop. The sign above the door read, Second Story Antiques. Because that's what this was. My second story, the one I got to write for myself. On opening day, a woman in her 50s came in, touching one of the silver frames gently. I read about you, she said softly. I was the invisible daughter in my family too. Thank you for telling your story. I started getting letters and emails from women across the country. They tried to erase you, but you carved your name into history. Your story gave me the courage to walk away. Each note felt like a quiet chorus telling me I was no longer alone. Months later, on a golden autumn afternoon, I closed the shop early. I slid into the driver's seat of my car. The same car they once wanted me to sell. The sun spilled over the hood as I drove down the open highway, windows down, wind in my hair. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from anyone. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was simply free. And as the sunlight danced across the dashboard, I knew my legacy wasn't the heirlooms I sold or the family I left behind. It was the story I finally claimed as my own. The gallery exhibit ran for another month, and to my surprise, it became a quiet sensation in our small city. Local papers called it the Forgotten Daughters story, and a few bigger blogs picked it up as a human interest piece. By the time it closed, I had earned enough royalties and sales to finally make a dream reel. I rented a small corner space downtown and opened my own antique shop. The sign above the door read, Second Story Antiques. Because that's what this was. My second story. The one I got to write for myself. On opening day, a woman in her 50s came in, touching one of the silver frames gently. I read about you, she said softly. I was the invisible daughter in my family too. Thank you for telling your story. I started getting letters and emails from women across the country. They tried to erase you, but you carved your name into history. Your story gave me the courage to walk away. Each note felt like a quiet chorus, telling me I was no longer alone. Months later, on a golden autumn afternoon, I closed the shop early. I slid into the driver's seat of my car. The same car they once wanted me to sell. The sun spilled over the hood as I drove down the open highway, windows down, wind in my hair. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from anyone. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was simply free. And as the sunlight danced across the dashboard, I knew my legacy wasn't the heirlooms I sold or the family I left behind. It was the story I finally claimed as my own. The ballroom at the Willows Country Club glowed with golden chandeliers and soft jazz. But I stayed tucked into the shadow of a corner table, clutching my glass of sparkling water. My navy blue dress, the one I'd bought with my own paycheck, suddenly felt plain against the sea of satin and sequins swirling around the dance floor. Across the room, my parents were radiant, laughing with guests, their smiles sharp and rehearsed. But every few seconds, I caught it, the quick flick of my father's eyes toward me, the tight curve of my mother's lips curling in disappointment. They leaned into each other, whispering behind their champagne flutes, and I didn't need to hear the words to know they were about me. I pressed my back against the wall, letting my gaze drift toward the center of the celebration. Caroline, my little sister, floated through her wedding like a princess in ivory silk, her train carried carefully by two bridesmaids. Guests fawned over her, cameras flashed, and my parents beamed with a pride that felt like a slap in my face. I had arrived on time, smiled politely, brought a thoughtful gift, and yet it was as if just existing in this room was a humiliation for them. Their glares carried the same silent accusation that had hung in the air for weeks. It all started 2 weeks ago, when they summoned me to their house like it was a matter of life or death. I thought someone was sick. Instead, they sat me down in the living room and said, with dead serious faces, "You need to sell your car. Caroline needs this wedding to be perfect." My car, the only thing I'd ever bought outright, after years of side jobs and late-night shifts. They wanted me to sell it, because my sister needed an extra designer flower wall for Instagram photos. I said no, and from that moment, I became the villain in my own family. So here I was, half hidden in a corner of the reception, their glares pinning me in place while strangers danced and toasted the perfect couple. The music swelled, the photographer called for family photos, and I stayed where I was, because I knew exactly how much they didn't want me in the frame. I didn't know it then, but this night, this was the first step toward a revenge they would remember for the rest of their lives. 2 weeks before the wedding, My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Come home tonight. Important family meeting. I left work early, heart racing. A family meeting usually meant someone was sick or in trouble. I walked into my parents' living room expecting bad news. Maybe my dad's blood pressure, maybe something with grandma. Instead, I found them sitting side by side on the leather sofa, hands clasped, faces solemn like they were about to announce a death in the family. Sit down, my father said, patting the armchair across from them. I sat, bracing myself. My mom took a deep breath and said, Your sister's wedding is in 2 weeks, and, well, we need you to sell your car. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? Dad leaned forward. The wedding expenses are higher than we planned. Caroline deserves a perfect day, and we thought since you live alone and don't have a husband or kids, you could contribute. I laughed. Short, bitter, involuntary. You want me to sell my car? The one I spent 5 years saving for? My only way to get to work?